tips I'm just about to share with you about like streamlining your system and helping you improve your outcomes. The IP system, as you're aware, we've put some content in there when you first decide to subscribe about what people are using now, but we're totally aware that all different schools operate in different ways. So what we do is we put some ideas in there that you're able to attach your thoughts and ideas. We also share with you, as both of you are aware, our fully populated training system for you to actually explore and try out some ideas. And as you develop your own way, your system needs to evolve and be tidied and things archived, just so you can get what you want from the system. So the first thing I'm just going to cover is the journey. And both Becky and myself, we mentioned this because we consider our solution about creating a journey for the staff member, improving the staff member, but also improving the school or college. So what I try to get over to people is the idea of thinking of that staff portfolio as more or less creating a case study for that member of staff, thinking about showing the way in which their journey of improvement happens. And it's important that you start, in my opinion, with the outcome, and you build school IP about what you actually want to achieve. So we work with you, as both of you are aware, with your thoughts, your vision, your ideas. And these now are some questions that people ask us personally. So things like, what about appraisal cycle dates? And the question that comes back to people is say, well, actually, what does your appraisal policy say? Because we end up with people saying, yes, we want it to run the academic year, but their policies turn around and say, actually, our appraisal cycle says we start the 1st of November. So what happens from the 1st of September to the 1st of November? And as Becky talked about, she happened to mention and said, well, actually, we need somewhere to put data. So you can't have gaps in the system. Performance management objectives. Well, are they going to be traditional, as in line managers setting them, or bulk uploading, as we talked about? But there are schools out there and colleges where staff actually set their objectives and then set related actions. So the idea is you can tweak it for your needs. When you're uploading evidence, the question that comes from staff when we deliver training is, oh, how much have we got to update and when have we got to do it? So it's all these things that you have to consider. Standards, when do we review those? Do we only review them at the end of the year? Do we review them halfway through the year? The areas for development, those next steps that are very much important about driving improvement, helping staff on their journey, is, are staff allowed to add their own thoughts? Are they allowed to add their own areas for development, or is that something that's only done by a line manager or through monitoring? CPD, many people initially thought that the CPD section only was a record of external courses, but actually it can be used for internal CPD as well. So many schools, they have CPD sessions every week, and therefore you can actually log those. And as Becky mentioned, you can log it into the future. So if you've got people who are doing, for example, manual handling, pediatric first aid, those type of things, when the renewal comes through, you can set a course in the distance and actually use it as a reminder. Interim reviews. Well, is it just going to be a function of when they're going to take place? Is it back to the old traditional appraisal cycle of just mid-year? Because it doesn't have to be that, and I'll talk about that. And the next question that people come up with me is things like, oh, do we have to use a computer? Well, actually, there's an app that allows you to actually log on and move forward. So the idea is the very quote that says, if you don't know where you want to go to, you don't be surprised if you end up somewhere else. So the idea of the key from the person leading this is knowing what they want to achieve. So one of the hardest things for both Becky and myself is when we start having these discussions with staff and it says, oh, I didn't know it could do that, or wish I'd known. All right. So what I'm going to do now is just more or less make you aware that on our website, there's comprehensive guidance in insights and webinars that help you develop certain aspects of the system. So what I'm going to do now is just share my screen with you. And you can see what I've done now is just opened up a portfolio. And one of the big things is about understanding this portfolio, because what we find is people feel they have to align with us, but actually what we do is we align with your vision, your direction. So I'm very much into a less is more approach is the key to success. So you actually need very little to get school IP up and running. So the record so far to setting up a school is actually 2 hours. So think about what you actually need and what you want to achieve. So the more complex you make the system, the more staff member types, the more user rights, the more different bits of CPD, different range of monitoring, all those different things obviously requires more setup. So, and the staff have to be aware that this portfolio actually belongs to them. So it's actually a way in which they become involved. It's not done to, it's about them being involved and creating this portfolio and taking ownership for it. So this portfolio has to be fit for purpose. Staff have to be able to engage in that process. So the first thing I end up looking for is we look at user rights. Well, user rights we've just been talking about with Becky, and to make you aware that actually user rights will allow you to go in here and just delete certain things from this portfolio. So for example, TAs, you might say, well, we're not going to monitor TAs. So in that case, then you have the ability to actually turn that off. And to do that, it's quite straightforward. If we come into settings and we go to users, you will see here there's user rights. Well, first of all, when you look at user rights, there's quite a few because we just set you up and you think, well, actually, some of these I don't need. Well, you can see which ones have already been allocated to people. And as Becky mentioned before, well, actually, some of these might not be relevant. So in the case of here, I don't want chair of governors in here because I want to make it less is more. So anything with a remove, I can actually remove and I can tidy it up. But what we're actually concerned about is going back to that idea of portfolio. And if I click on the user right, deep dive, I can now look. So you can see, for example, monitoring, I can actually click that and all of a sudden that monitoring bit of that person's menu won't be there anymore. I can click on standards. So for example, I have schools where support staff haven't really been introduced to the idea of standards. So in that case, then we can just turn that off for them so that it hasn't got loads and loads of content in there. It might be that you don't want all the staff to have areas for development. So it might be for support staff, we're not quite ready with there, so we can turn that bit off. So the idea is you're able to go back and actually have what you want in the system. So when we go back to Jessica here, so I've ended up setting up systems where actually it's been so streamlined that in theory they've got objectives, they haven't got monitoring turned on, they haven't got standards turned on, they haven't got areas for development turned on, they've got CPD. So the idea is they've only got a few things in here because it's about knowing when to introduce things to staff. Also about staff member types. So as you know, when you set up the staff member types, and if we go into here again and go to settings and we go to users, we know, as Becky's just explained, staff member types, they're all linked to things, but you can see there's an awful lot in here. And if you're not ready for things, what we're able to do, like for example, here support, what I'm going to do is we have the ability then to remove it. So if we're not going to have somebody as a business manager in our system at this very moment in time, we can just unclutter it here. So you can see we can start getting rid of things. So if we haven't got anybody in these groups, you can start deleting things. And at the same time, if you wanted to, you can create more. But as I said before, it's about less is more for me. The other thing we have the ability to do is other bits of settings. So we've just talked about going into here and deleting some of these. And just to make you aware, in the settings section, all the different areas allow you to just tweak things. So when we start looking at things, for example, CPD, we've got different types. Well, you might say, actually, those aren't relevant to us, and you find yourself shoehorning into our system. Well, actually, if you don't want some of these, you can just delete them, or you can add your own ones. So the idea is you might say, well, actually, it's CPD, internal CPD by department heads. So the idea is you're able to start tweaking things for your own need. And exactly the same when it comes around to monitoring. So if I come into monitoring in here, so settings, performance management, come into monitoring. Well, first of all, as you evolve in your system, we put some samples in here for you to look at. Well, actually, if you're not careful, when you come to add monitoring, all of a sudden these appear and you're going, oh, no, it's more things to clutter up. Well, you actually have the ability to just click on them and archive them. You haven't deleted them because if I click up here, you can see that all of a sudden the inactive ones appear. So you can see we've got loads in our training site that are inactive. So the idea is you can tweak it and you can see exactly what you want to see. And again, you know, in here we've got different times. But the idea is just thinking about what you want. And as you said before, when we came down to it, about bulk actioning the monitoring going forward. Okay, and the final bit just for this little section is going back into here. We also have the ability where all of a sudden people are going, oh no, crikey, it's not quite fit for purpose at the present time because we don't use this word interim review. Well, actually, if you ask us, we can do a dictionary change and we can change that to something like check-in, or we can change it to professional discussion. So when you go into that area, you can actually record. So we have some organisations that more or less say we're aiming for every month for a line manager to go in there and have that professional discussion. So they can come into here and see when they actually do it and add that interim review. It doesn't have to be interim review. You could say it's professional discussion. You could say it's a check-in. It could be anything you want. So the idea is you start to create a record of conversations. You can also, if you wanted to, with those professional conversations, actually have it up here. So it all depends on your organisation. So for example, here, you can actually create this check-in with a line manager, check-in with the head of department, and just record it in here. And if you linked it to something, so for example, here, coaching conversation, all of a sudden then when you start putting that blog in here, if you went to coaching conversation up here, you'd have a record of all those coaching conversations. So it's about just thinking about building up your culture as you go forward. So the idea is evolve, have a think, plan what you want to achieve, and then see whether you work with us or just have a look at the settings to achieve what you want. Okay, the next bit is about monitoring. Now, we're still having conversations with many people who didn't know that actually when you do monitoring on a member of staff, it all appears in here, etc. Okay, but did you realise you can actually have this type of web appear? So be it by using the same type of gradings. So for example, OL7 here, if I go through and click on there, all of a sudden you have one on top of the other. So the member of staff knows exactly the journey they're on. But also about monitoring, you have the ability to bring everything together. And it's amazing how many people don't know the idea that it's my report section. So the idea is I'm able to go along, click on monitoring, choose a particular monitoring form. So for example, if I go into here and I just happen to choose one, so I might choose, or I'll go for that one here. And all of a sudden then it will bring together all the monitoring that's generally taken place for that particular form between those dates. Now I can see here Becky's actually gone along and changed this in a previous bit here. So I'm actually going to go back and just put some more data in here. That's in 22. Okay, so you can see everything is about collecting information and then being able to filter. Now your monitoring forms, you might choose that they're going to be very comment based. But as I said at the beginning, I'm very much into leaders having the biggest impact for the least amount of work. So the idea of thinking about it, you can do comments, and what actually happens is you'll bring together all the comments in the system, and then you go through and make your judgments accordingly. Or you can have certain questions. Remember, it's your choice of how you want to do it. Questions on certain things, and then you're able to rate them, and you're able to create data. And from this data, if you wanted to, I could start clicking on here and looking at progress, and all of a sudden those people that scored pretty high on that idea about progress, you're able to use them as a benchmark and direct other members of staff to it. So the idea about it is just bringing the data together, and you can do exactly the same when it comes down to things in here in the My Report section. You can do the same, be looking at the idea of objectives. You can do the same with looking at standards. And again, it's all about you having the ability to filter. So you're going to collect an awful lot of information here from a leadership perspective, cutting your workload. It's about having the ability to generate those necessary reports for you. And you can build up your layers in here. So for example, I'm able to go and filter it down to department. So I can look at an English department's observations and then set a particular time. And just so I don't have to keep on going through lots and lots of filtering, I can actually come up here if I wanted to and save the filter. So it allows me just to keep on going back and getting things at my fingertips. So the idea is not to have to spend lots and lots of clicks or going through lots and lots of data to find things. It's all about just having a look and finding it. And the final bit is making aware of things like the development plan. And the development plan in here, the final last step, is making you aware that actually you don't end up creating a development plan each year. What you do is you create a constantly live document. So at any time, for example, I'm able to start thinking about my next objectives for the next year. So I could actually start setting my objectives if I wanted to and put them in 23, 24. And what actually happens is it constantly becomes evolved. So what we end up in the past was people at the end of each year said, by the way, can we now add our new school development plan? Well, actually, your school development plan now constantly evolves, and the same with activities. How you do that is up to you, whether you want to get heads of department involved, but it's just making you aware that it's a constantly live, evolving system. So in theory, those are my 5 bits to success. So I don't know if anyone's got any questions on those 5 steps to success. No? Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen. Are you okay to take over, Becky?
Yeah, sure. So thanks everybody. That was a long one, so we seemed to have a lot to get through, so apologies for the length of that, but I hope you found some of it interesting and some of it useful. So what I suggest, today was a bit of a light touch, believe it or not, with an overview of the process. I suggest you review the guide, the help guide, and determine what your organisation's approach is by looking at the contents. It will guide you through what the possibilities are. And then run through that guide to administrate your school IP using the videos, using the appropriate sections, and then after that, probably sharing those appropriate instructions and videos to line managers. We're always here anyway if you need support with that. And here are our contact details should you need them. But in the meantime, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. And unless there are further questions, we will see you sometime on Teams. Is that okay, everybody? Any further questions at all?
Thank you very much.
Okay, you take care. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.